Go
It's
ahead and
noon.
introduce Jim. I think that's probably time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's good. Jim, I hope you're on. Um,
I'm here.
great. Great. So we're really happy to have Jim Czuprynski. He's a great presenter, presents at a variety of forums, has over 40 years experience in information technology, speaks at Open World, Oracle Code, Collaborate, Kscope. So if you, he's really a really sought after public speaker on Oracle technology. So if any question you have on Oracle technology, you can look up whether he has blogged about it or he has tweeted about it or he has spoken about it somewhere. And he's a very entertaining speaker as well. So with that, let me turn this over to Jim.
Yeah. Just one extra interesting fact about Jim is he's just finished his BA degree, and it only took him 44 years. I think he was just bored with it and decided to do other things in the meantime. But he's just got his degree after 44 years. And he talks about it. I think he's even got a picture for us. But Jim, thank
Yes,
you so.
I think I sent the picture along to you. I'm just going to go ahead and get presenting here. If I can
Yeah,
get there.
brilliant.
There
You
we go.
steal the screen and have your wicked way, sir.
I shall do that, sir. Okay, here we go. All right. I'm going to stop everybody else's screen sharing and we're going to go into the infinite screen sharing thing here. So let me go to my power slide. Can everyone see that okay? I hope. Yes? No?
Yes, we can.
Perfect.
Okay, you could. Good. And I'm going to be in your virtual background for a bit. You can see this young lady here. She's probably a Polish cleaning lady actively trying to clean something off of a piece of, looks like something from the crown, some sort of bill from the crown. But anyway, so by the way, my name's Jim Czuprynski, as everyone mentioned. I'm really honored to be here. We got some really great presentations today. I find Oracle Graph and Graph Studio to be absolutely fascinating. And I have two really brief things to share with you on that today. Let me just make sure I set my time so that we don't run out of time here. I hate running out of time for folks. So let me just start my stopwatch. Okay, here we go. So a little bit more about myself. Well, first of all, if you can see from my background, this is downtown Chicago, Illinois. And if you can see that red building there, that is known or used to be known as the CNA Insurance Building. And it's still there. It's a 44-story building owned by an insurance company that had a very interesting history behind it. Three pieces of history there. Number one, windows kept popping out of it and killing people below it. Think about that for an insurance company. Absolutely true. Second interesting fact, it is where I really learned to become a professional programmer. Okay, and a programmer analyst back in the day. I actually met and worked briefly for about a month with Stephen Feuerstein, who was so bored with insurance work that he actually, true story, went on to learn Oracle. Ask Stephen about that. And third thing that's interesting is it's actually now the home of DePaul University, which is where I graduated from after only 44 years. I had actually finished 3 of my 4 years of college in my first 2 years, and then life happened. I ended up getting married, starting a career, and about 10 years ago, I went back and finished up the last 50 or so hours for that. In the meantime, I became an author. I've written dozens, if not hundreds of articles. I think I'm probably close to 200 articles. Spend my time traveling around a lot. I'll be at Kscope 22 in June in Dallas, Fort Worth area, Grapevine, Texas. I winter in Illinois, summer in Wisconsin. I am also Rita, an avid amateur bird watcher. That's actually a picture from the cloud forest in Ecuador, outside of Quito. And that was one of 17 species of hummingbirds I saw in 10 minutes while I was there. I try to be an athlete. I'm not very good. I am the oldest guy in my martial arts class. I'm sorry, second oldest. The oldest person usually kicks my butt, and that oldest person is actually my wife. I'm not a very good cyclist. This is from about 5 years ago. I fell off my bike 2 weeks before K-Scope and ended up schlepping around my laptop bag over my shoulder in great pain. I'm not much of a cross-country skier either. That's a real picture. Okay, I staged it a little bit, but I've had head falls badly, much better than that. Follow me on Twitter. We'll talk about Twitter today quite a bit, actually. You can email me with any questions at Jim the Y Guy. Follow me also, or connect up with me on LinkedIn. But let me tell you about one other thing I do. Leon Amitzi, also another Oracle ACE director, and myself, we started it's almost now coming up on 18 months ago. We're into our 40th episode, I think, of Beyond Tech Skills. You can go out to this site and look at our podcast. We don't talk about tech. Well, we do. We talk about the 2/3 of tech that have nothing to do with coding. Because let me tell you, the secret of being a professional, of having a profession in technology, 2/3 of it is what they don't teach you in coding class. It's what you need to do to work with people, to work with your users, to work with your DBA, as painful as that can be. To actually listen to the user community and your CIO, maybe even to manage people. And we've had some fascinating interviews this year so far, in fact, including one with a psychiatrist on mental health and good mental health. And by the way, the last podcast episode we just dropped 2 weeks ago was with Stephen Feuerstein. And guess what? Nothing on PL SQL at all. Enough about us. It's just fun, something we do in our spare time. It does take up quite a bit of our time, actually, but we really enjoy it. I'm coming to you today as sort of an advanced applications developer and a DBA, okay? And one of the things that I really wanted to highlight here is the way DBAs typically look at data, and even application developers, right? Usually if somebody says to me, hey, I'm working on a new project, I'm actually working on an Apex project right now, I said, give me an ERD. Show me an entity relationship diagram, show me a data model, whatever. I want to understand how things relate to each other. So here we might have, 3 sets of data. Owners of bank accounts that generate transactions or transfers back and forth between each other, right? SQL is perfect for this. And if you're an experienced person with SQL, I've been using SQL for almost 45 years now, I guess it is, 45 years. You understand this, right? It's really easy to write a query that'll tell you all kinds of cool things about what are common between owners and accounts and transactions. But how about this? Someone comes to you and says, okay, you're this bank over here, the blue bank, right? I want to know if there's anything coming in from this red bank over here. And again, I'm just picking red and blue as colors, right? Maybe the blue bank is over here in Chicago, Illinois. Maybe red bank is over here in Moskva, is maybe in Russia. Who knows? And maybe these other banks are in Romania, Poland, who knows where, South America. I want you to tell me, have we received any transactions from this other bank? Because I'm seeing something weird, something strange, something hanky, as we say here in the Midwest, right? Something weird is going on. I think there's fraud. You're not going to be able to do that with SQL. Not easily. But with PGQL, you can do it. With property graphs, you can do it. Here's another thing. Let's think about this, right? I was going to use Netflix as my model. Well, hopefully you don't own any stock in Netflix. But this was my original model from Netflix about 3 months ago. Remember when Netflix was popular and profitable? Maybe you're starting up a campaign to get people to watch movies. And by the way, this is interesting because you may not know this. Netflix really doesn't care what the #1 movie is. Neither does Apple TV, right? Neither does Disney Plus. What they really care about is how many hours are being watched. That's the way this actually works. So maybe you could choose your films, right? Maybe you want to have an action adventure movie like Nobody, awesome film, or The Power of the Dog, right? Which is kind of a combination of Western and murder mystery, if you haven't seen it, okay? Really excellent story. But you're trying to promote both of these because what you want are eyeballs. You want hours watched. I don't care which one's #1. I just want you to watch, right? So maybe my promo, this cat over here watches Nobody and goes, hey, blue cat, This is Gray Cat. Go watch Nobody. And no Blue Cat goes, watches it and goes, hey, you got to go try these. And, Gray, funny shaped cat, he's not into Westerns, or he's not into modern stuff. He wants to watch something different. He wants something with Clint Eastwood in it, maybe, right? So maybe he wants to watch Gran Torino. Gran Torino's more of a nobody movie than a Power of the Dog movie, right? Even though Eastwood starred in action movies as well as Westerns, right? Maybe I'm just trying to get people to watch something else in a different genre. This is not easy to figure out in SQL. Property graphs and graph databases, how something is connected is what really matters, right? Remember, I want hours watched. I don't care what movie, what media you do to accomplish that. So let's go back to our first example, right, of the banks. And by the way, if you do have questions, throw them in the Q&A. I will get to them at the end because we have a lot to cover. But let's pretend just for a minute, you're now a fraud investigator, all right? You have 2 minutes, not even that, to tell me between these owners of these bank accounts, Vladimir, Jakub, Fraud Assurance, whoever those guys are, and these accounts doing these types of transactions. Here's a list of transactions. By the way, this is a very simple and simplistic example, but it's a great example to show exactly how you could use this to find the grifters, to find the people that are stealing. Yeah. Now you've got a few minutes. Quickly now, just look at these. Tell me whether any laundering has been happening. You could be the Federal Trade Commission. You could be the Securities and Exchange Commission. You could be Deutsche Bank, right? You could be someone who's thinking about making loans to any of these people, or just maybe you're trying to figure out whether or not they're going to be reliable investors. And, maybe you don't want to do business with them. Well, how can I do this? Well, let me show you. I'm going to go look at some of the Graph Studio tools. Now, you saw my prior two colleagues that were just presenting. You can get into this. I'm going to jump over real quickly and demo live what could possibly go wrong. As I demo live here, what my home looks like. So here I have a user account called AGD Fraud, right? Graph database, fraud, right? I have a model I'll share with you in a minute. I also have some notebooks here, more on that coming up. And I have 4 different graphs that have been created. I'll jump over to the model real quickly. Now, remember, one of the things we're talking about were relationships. Let's pretend what we really wanted to model was Twitter feeds, social media data, right? So I built this model using what's built into Graph Studio, because I really don't know where to get started. What the heck is a vertex? If you hear vertex, think node. I say vertex, you say node. Think of something that can have a relationship. You hear edge, think relationship. That's the way I like to think. A node has a relationship to something else. Node equals vertex, edge equals relationship. Okay, that's an oversimplification, but that's basically what it comes down to. And I've got 2 tables that actually are input into this. And what I'm going to do here is actually look at one of them called Twitter members. And I can actually, while I'm constructing this, look at some of the data in here. And so I've got just a dumb number for their Twitter ID. I've got some handles for them, Zone Flutter, Patriot, Deplorable, etc. Where they are, unspecified, United States, what their time zone is, do they have any followers, and so forth, right? But I can also look at the other dimension. And what I can do is go back here to my summary real quickly and see that I also have payloads. Payloads, right? And what do we have here? Well, I've got a Twitter ID. I've got somebody that originated the tweet, somebody that sent it. And here's what some of the data is. These are made up, okay? But if you're out on Twitter and you're working within a political campaign, I'm working in the middle of 2 right now for Congress, one for my old Congressperson and one for who I'm hoping is going to win the primary in about a month. Politics ain't beanbag, folks. It's nasty, right? People have definite opinions, and it's not unusual to hear people say evil things about other people, and you just have to get used to it. It's like water off your back, right? People say all kinds of things on Twitter all the time. But we're actually going to look at a model of how we can use that, the terminology of polarity and subjectivity. We'll talk about it a little bit later. By the way, these are real metrics that you can essentially say subjectivity, how truthy is something, and polarity is, hey, I just retweeted a message. How aligned to the original message or to the theme of the messages are we actually close to? And obviously a negative number is, no, I'm responding against you. I don't like your opinion as much, right? These are real types of metrics. I did a little research on this, right? The key point here is I took a bunch of tables and I glued them into a model called NW complex. And if I go to look at this now, I actually created, if I go back to my summary, a graph from this. And we'll look at the result from that just a little bit later. The key point I want to make here is if you know nothing about Graph Studio or about Graph in graph databases, you don't need to, because you can easily build a model. Once I have a model, and you don't need a model, by the way, because you can also, if you want, if you can see this here, let me make that a little bigger, you can actually use code. And what this really down here says is, okay, I have a vertex table, right? Vertex means node, called Twitter members. And what connects them? What are the relationships? The payloads that are sent. And notice the source key and the destination key, right? I'd like you to think about vertices as nodes, you know, things that can be connected, and think of edges as the connections. And of course, I have the idea of someone sent a message, originator, and someone resent the message or didn't, right? Somebody's the end of the chain. So that's the kind of things that we're going to actually look at. If you look at this property graph statement, it's really not that hard to understand what it's saying here. It's a little bit different. It's not exactly like creating a view, but it's not that far apart either, right? The only difference here is there's a direction, there's a vector, right? There's a weight to it, and there's a direction. Interact. And we're going to talk more about that in just a second. So what else can I do? Well, let me show you. I'm going to go back to, let's make sure, see everything is in memory. One of the things to know about Graph Studio is that because what we're simply mapping are complex, extremely complex mathematical models, they work best if they're already stored in memory. So to operate against a graph, it must be put up into memory. And you can see my circles are spinning here. How much you want to bet I'm going to get logged out here? I'm going to have to log back in, which is not a problem. I can do that. Let me go back to my home for a second. Yep, it looks like I'm going to probably get logged out, maybe, but we'll see what happens. I'll come back to that in a second because I'm going to jump back to my slides. So I'm going to jump over to my slides for a minute. I showed you this already. I showed you that there are these things called notebooks. We're going to look at these in just a few minutes. You may have noticed that the Get Started notebook changed. This is a little bit of an older slide. It actually has a reference to Sparkle. Did you see that when I actually brought that up? I showed you how to model a graph very easily. I could create it with a property graph PGQL command, or I could use the modeler to actually lay these things out. And notice here, what did I do? I'm going to go back to my fraud example in a second. I'm going to take a bunch of accounts, bank accounts, and I'm going to use them as my nodes, my vertexes, my vertices, and my transfers are going to become the edges or the things that connect them. And then I can, as I showed you, look at the different properties. I can even drill into the data that's listed here and how all these things are connected. I already shared that with you. I can look at the data within them. You can see that this is the data coming from a table called agdfraud.accounts. And what does it have? Who's the owner? What's the account number? And an account name. Ilyich Investment Holdings, DACA Retirement Planning. If you don't know what a DACA is what Russians like to call their summer home. So like a cabin, if you will, right? I can save the graph with the model if I want to. Do you need to have a model? No. You can create the graph simply with, believe it or not, Here's an example of after having created that graph, I can load it up into memory. I can also create directly from the property graph command. Okay, you got to get a little bit smarter about how this works, right? And notice in this case, right, I've got a series of accounts. Actually, I'm using a view called account summary, where I glued together the owner and the account information in a view. I can do that too, by the way. And the edge, the connector, are the transfers. And I've got a source account. Where did it start? And where did it end up, right? And these are, as you're going to see, referential. Let me go back to my demo state here. Let me see where I am. Let me see if my stuff is still loading. Okay, so we're checking to see if our stuff is in memory, and they've dropped out of memory. Okay, cool. I'm going to go load this graph back into memory. What it comes down to is computational time, right, is not cheap. And so what, by default, if I'm not using that graph over time, Graph Studio will go, okay, pal, I'm going to reclaim that container. Think of it like a Kubernetes container or some other sort of container, right? A little virtual environment. Notice it's recreating the environment with 14 gigabytes of memory. And then it's going to load my FP complex graph up in there. This is going to take probably a minute or two, and that's fine. This is also what's called the jobs screen. And this job screen is actually reporting that things are progressing, right? It's going to take a few more seconds, but eventually I'll be able to take a look at this. What will I be able to see? And I'll show you that live in just a second as my stuff gets loaded. I'm going to go over to my fraud detection notebooks, and you'll notice that, hey, I got an error. Yeah. FP simple, another graph I have, hasn't been loaded into memory. And by the way, this guy and this guy and this guy all use FP simple, and so does him. And if I try to fire this off right now, I'd get an error saying it's not in memory. Here's an earlier execution of this, of FP complex, a little query against it. And I'll show you in my Prezzo how that actually worked. So I mentioned, let me just take a swig of water here, that I can build different Zeppelin notebooks. If you've worked with any of the machine learning algorithms or analytics inside autonomous database. And by the way, I'm running against an ATP instance right now. Okay. Doesn't have to be an ADW instance, but I'm running against an ATP instance. You can immediately go and start creating these notebooks. And here's the statement that I just shared with you. Again, I'm going to re-execute it in just a second, where I basically said, show me map information from each account through each edge and show me the connections between them. Let's see if my graph is right here. Yep, it is. I'm just going to double check status here and see if my graph is loaded already. It'll take just a second here to come back and tell me. And yes, FP complex is now in memory. See that? It loaded up quickly. I'm going to come back to my notebook, to my fraud detection example, and I'm going to run this one live right here. So I'm going to re-execute this and essentially note that originally I had, in an earlier example, I had some accounts filtered out. I'm going to leave those filtered out. I'm going to basically look right now at all of my data and try to figure out, are there any patterns here that I can see? Well, if I start over here at this green guy here, or even better, at this blue guy here, somebody named Judy Ruliani, what is all this 4, 2, 3 stuff? It's all the way that I can display things. So I'm just going to come over here and show you that there are dozens of ways to show these data, including the initial size of the page that comes up, whether I want to have a light or a dark theme. Should I collect or keep similar edges. I'm going to uncollect them for a minute. And now that's really hard to see. Yeah, it is. It sure is. But I'm going to go back to collect here. What it basically says, if you see a number here that says 4, I've got 4 or 5 or 10 transactions of exactly the same type. And to unclutter this, I'm going to just combine them into one line. Also note, my friends, there are arrows here, right? So here's one. Let's start with this green guy. Judy Ruliani, not who you think I said, sent money to some guy named Roman Ceausescu, who sent money through, and these, by the way, are the different accounts that they own, right? Back to this guy who sent it here, who sent it here. Can I declutter this a bit? Well, if I do a little bit of research and I take another look at it, I find out that really these account numbers here are really kind of like pass-through account numbers. I'm going to just get rid of them and rerun the statement and see if it becomes a little clearer. Come on now. There we go. And now what we'll see is a little bit of a different picture. We figured out that basically those other accounts were simply things that were being handed back and forth, right? We can see here, and I'll, by the way, go back into here for a minute and change the settings. And again, I know I'm spending a little extra time on this, but I want you to see just how powerful this is. Now I've said, get rid of the keep, right? Don't collect them. Show me everything. And you're going to see that Judy Ruliani transferred 3 transactions, 3 separate set of transactions via a retirement fund contribution to Roman Ceausescu, who then did a retirement fund withdrawal to Vladimir Ivanovich, who then sent other money over to Jakub Wojciechowski, who then sent money over to another organization called Fraud Assurance, who then sent it back to themselves and then sent it back to Judy Ruliani, not who you thought I said. Yeah. Folks, you've seen money laundering in action. It's well-known facts that this is how oligarchs love to clean up money, right? It's called money laundering. That's why it's called that, right? Because one of the best ways to do this, by the way, is to pass things from other people, right? By the way, a lot of this has been coming to light with the war in Ukraine right now about, where do the oligarchs in the particular country live and who really is holding on to their money? And there's been some really surprising things, and you've heard of things like asset seizures in offshore accounts and asset seizures, things like, $600 million yachts, things like that, right? Because that's how oligarchs and even some legitimate cases, I shouldn't say legitimate, but you get the idea, people transfer money and transfer it from cash or other holdings into property, right? When it eventually comes back as cash, by the way, you may notice that some of these things are marked as CHR. Yeah, those transactions were actually marked as charity contributions. If I'm a fraud investigator, I'm stroking my long gray beard going, what the heck is going on here? Okay, this is a typical example of how fraud would get caught. And again, graphing it makes it completely apparent versus if I had to write a SQL statement, it might not be as apparent. So let me go back to my Prezzo for a bit. Okay, I already showed you that. I showed you this. By the way, I'll show you there are other relationships that you can map, other patterns that you can map. There's also some really neat analytical functions, more on that coming up as well. Here's just 2 of them, in degree and out degree. We'll see this more when we take a look at, by the way, our Twitter example, right? Our social media example. You can see here that this fund 10101, right? It had no transactions out, but 10 transactions in. And by the way, that was one of the ones that I kept. This one's a little weird. He's got 11 out and just 2 in. This one actually looks like it's something that's being used as kind of a pass-through, right? It's just a node that it's temporary. right? Because things are coming in and things are going out. Same thing with some of these other accounts, right? That I love this one, retirement planning. Yeah, Igor and Lev's expense account. Yeah, something's going on here. Maybe some of these accounts are legitimate people owned by legitimate people or organizations, and some are just being passed through, right? And in degree and out degree, that's just one example of an analytical function that I can use to find this stuff. And if you came to my presentation back in February, this is about where I ended. I got a lot more to show you, because with a little bit of polish, as I showed you, we were able to figure out that, yeah, Judy Ruliani did a nice job basically laundering some bucks. Okay, cool. I shared this with you already. I can do all kinds of things with visualization in terms of how big I want the graph initially, whether labels should be displayed. Whoops, I went a little bit too fast there. Whether or not I want to use a light or dark theme. I don't have to use an edge marker, by the way, but you'll notice mine have arrows. I like that because it gives me a direction. Different layouts, more on that coming up. And finally, different backgrounds and representations. I can even do a 3D display. You need a pretty good monitor to really make that look like something significant, but you get the idea. There's all kinds of really cool stuff that you can do here. Moving on. I'm a big fan of South Park. If you've ever seen it, right? I'm going to do a little bit of a demo here showing you how we can look at social media posts. But this was an interesting study that's just about a year old, and literally just about a year old, that if you remember back in the day when we were just starting to get vaccines for COVID-19, and people were still talking about, no, you don't need a vaccine, go take this other thing, I don't remember specifically, horse paste, but people were really doing this, right? And it harkened me back to an episode of South Park from almost 15 years ago, in which this young lady, whose last name was Information, ran a health food store and a health studio, if you will. And when they brought one of the kids to her because he was sick and actually needed a kidney transplant, and if you know South Park, it's Kenny, because Kenny dies every episode. That's the joke, right? She would say things like, oh, no, he's going to get better. He's going to get better. He always gets worse before he gets better. And people would say things like, wow, that's amazing misinformation. You get it? Amazing Yeah, okay. The key point by this one study is there were 12 main folks on Facebook identified as, here are the people that are the super spreaders, not of COVID, but of misleading information about the vaccine, right? Everything from nanochips in it, right, as people are tweeting out about nanochips inside the vaccine on their cell phones and being worried about being followed everywhere. I always thought that was hilarious, right? The point I'm trying to make here is this was an interesting analysis. By the way, do you know the difference between ignorance and apathy? I don't know, and I don't care. I'm not trying to offend anyone with my opinion. I'm just stating that someone did a study and found that it was 12 key people on Facebook and on social media that were the nexus, the centers, the nodes that were transmitting a lot of these data, right? Now, there is a concept of bots if you've been out on social media, right? And there's also the concept of something called a sock puppet, which is really not the same thing as a bot. A sock puppet is something that I put on my hand and pretend to be. It's not exactly a troll, right? But it's similar to that. So there's all these fascinating things that you can do with social media posts. I like focusing on Twitter because it's easy to understand. So how about this? Remember I showed you that model that I built? Here's what it actually looks like for all of the tweets that were sent out, starting at a particular point from the originator. And by the way, this is the default mode called force when we go to look at these different things, right? Where did it start? How did it spread? And so what I'm going to do is jump over and show you by simply changing from force to radial that it becomes immediately obvious what's happening here. So let me go do that. Let me go load up one of my other graphs. It'll probably take a couple seconds, and then I'll share that with you. Okay, that's going to be this guy. And let me load him up into memory. And that'll take a couple minutes. In the meantime, I'll go over to, yes, loaded already. I'll go over to my notebooks here in just a second. My job's running. Notice that I already still have that environment, so I don't need to reestablish that. The cool thing about Graph Studio is if it needed to reestablish the environment, it would go do it. Pretty cool stuff. I'm going to go over to social media patterns. And here's the graph that I just shared with you. This is from a prior execution. We're going to look at a couple of different ways of looking at this, but we do need to wait until that graph actually does load into memory. But based on that last execution, what I can see here is there are some people, this is in a radial distribution, if I remember correctly, that there are some people, by the way, the light green guy, he's here somewhere. Oh, I'm sorry. He's actually right here. Let me see if I can blow that up a little bit. Maybe a little easier to see. See if we can get it to fit. This is the guy that actually starts everything. It looks kind of weird, right? Well, why isn't he in the center? Because we're really focusing on who is the most prolific distributor of other information, right? So actually, these folks, by the way, they're red and blue. I've coded them that way because blue means they're negative subjectivity. I'm sorry, negative polarity. Red means they're positive polarity. And I actually have the ratings right here on each of the different edges. So you can kind of get a quick look at, you'll notice the ones that are much lower or negative are negative are blue, and the ones that are positive are red, if I remember correctly. But this is just one distribution way of showing that. Let me just see if my graph is loaded back up into memory so that we can do that. Okay, it's there. Good. Let's come back here and re-execute this guy. And so what I'm going to do is run this graph, or run this PGQL statement. And by the way, if you're not real clear on what all these statements mean, take heart. It takes time to learn how to write good PGQL statements, but it's not really that hard. It's very much like SQL. By the way, this is using the PGQL interpreter. There are other interpreters as well, and we'll look at that. I don't like SQL or PGQL. I want to use Java. No problem. I want to use Python. No problem. In fact, in certain cases, you may have to use Python or Java to do certain things. More on that coming up in just a bit. What I'm going to do here, notice I just reran that graph. I'm going to come in here and look at its properties again. And I'm going to change it from a radial display to a concentric display. Notice Oracle Graph Studio immediately runs that. Oh, okay, I get it. So these people are obviously the terminus of all the graph. These folks are the ones in the middle that are sending stuff back and forth to each other. I can also do this. Here's another interesting one, hierarchically. And hierarchically, and again, we could drill in a couple of different ways. I'm going to change this to left, right, for example. I can change the direction to be bottom, top. That's the one I kind of like the best for what I'm trying to show. And I can change how far apart vertices are distributed, how far apart the edges are distributed, what the difference in ranks are, and so forth, right? I can do a whole bunch of things here to change the way things are set. Just a huge number of different ways I can change this graph. One other one that's interesting, by the way, I just want to share this with you. There are other ways of showing this. I think I showed you circle, maybe? No, I showed concentric. There is also one, doesn't make any sense here, geographical. What if these were actual points on a map? Can I use Graph Studio for that? Yeah, it just doesn't work here. I don't have any geographic points, lat long or anything like that to show, but yeah, you can do that as well. That's another bit of research for that I want to do. Anyway, I wanted to share that with you. So this is a way that I can see dramatically, right, folks, exactly how things are distributed out. And who are the distributors, right? If you remember the one we were doing for fraud detection, we were very interested in who was handing things off to who. Here I'm more interested in who is the, who's the center, or which nodes are central to spreading a message. In the fraud example one, it was more of where did it end up? How did it go? And where did it, who did it flow through? But where did it end up? Here I'm more interested in who are the spreaders, okay? Who are the spreaders of a particular message or a retweet of a tweet or something like that. I showed you all of this already. I'm not going to bore you with this again. And of course, you'll get my slides. I showed you already followers and following. So here you can see that some of the people, these are just for fun, these handles I made up, right? These are not real data. But the number of followers, the number of following. But here's the first real analytic function we talked about, PageRank. Think about this. You have a website. You have pages on that website. Maybe you've got 100 different pages. Which ones get hit the hardest? Which ones do people go back to over and over again? They may initially come into your homepage. I've got a WordPress site, for example. They come into my homepage and then bang, they're hitting on one page. Maybe it's my most recent tweet or my most recent social media post or my most recent article, my most recent blog post, right? Which one do they go to most often? That's roughly how to think about PageRank, right? Which node are people going to most likely? And right now, based on an analysis of these data, and by the way, these are complex analytics, okay? You can read up on them. Deplorable 1003 has the highest PageRank, right? So that's one of the things we can look at. So that's an easy one to implement, right? You can do that very simply by simply implementing a PageRank analysis. But wait, there's more. Here's that PageRank analysis again. You can also use other things like what's the distance between two nodes? How close are they? How many times have they been hit? How many times, if you will, this page has been hit, and there's two different flavors of hits. There's authority, which is the one, if you imagine your website again, that people return to over and over and over again as what they view, somewhat subjectively, as truth. And then another thing, almost the inverse of that, is which are the ones they go back to all the time, regardless of authority. And I'm overstating that quite a bit, okay? I'm oversimplifying, I should say, quite a bit. But you can use all of these functions, and you can use them inside PGQL. You can use Java, you can use Python. If you install the right tool set, you can even use SQL CL. There are over 60 graph algorithms. I just showed you 4 of them, and a little bit more coming up. And also, there's the Graph Client API. You don't have to use Graph Studio at all. You can use your own studio, whatever you want to use, and use the API to build those apps. Not going to get into that at all today. That's another project entirely. Here are some of the analytic functions. And I talked a little bit about some of these, right? PageRank, which node is most important? Closeness, betweenness. That's an interesting one. How much this node may influence the flow of information within a graph. Oh, you mean like this guy here, this gal that's retweeting stuff a lot, that received it from somebody downstream and is now retweeting it to their 1 million followers? Yeah, think about that. Hits we talked about, by the way, it's not what you think. It stands for hyperlink induced topic score. And no, WTF is exactly what not it might seem to be. It's whom to follow. So here's an idea, right? If I want to get my tweet out about my latest episode of my podcast that dropped, I have a network of 12,000 people, say, on LinkedIn. Which one should I go to? Which one will give me the most positive impact to my social standing? In other words, I want to get my message out. I don't want to waste time with these 11,999. Give me the one that's going to blast out. If they blast out my message, it's going to have the biggest positive impact. back to my notes here and my demo for just a minute. I wanted to share with you also that I did all of these things in my notebook as well. By the way, here's how you actually add PageRank. You have to invoke some Java, or it's one way to do it with Java. I'm using the Java PGX to actually do that. That actually goes in and takes the model that's in memory and adds PageRank into the model. Here's another example. There's the display of that. I already shared that with you, of adding closeness centrality unit length, easy for you to say, the betweenness calculation and that HITS factor, right? And basically, this doesn't return anything, but it just says, okay, successfully added. And now I can go ahead and leverage all of these analytics. We're almost done. Because guess what? Not only can I use these analytics, if you work with Oracle Machine Learning, OML, you know you can use analytics, right? But you can also, I showed you this already, sorry. Let me go through that real quickly. Okay, I showed you that. Great, wonderful. Come on now. You ready for this? If your head's not blown, if your mind's not blown, there's also 4, at least this, last time I looked at this, 4 different machine learning tools specific to PGX. And the one I found most fascinating, I had to look up some examples, like how the heck would I use that? PG2VEC was one I'm going to have to take a look at. Right, I've got a model of financial transactions, right? The Judy Giuliani case. Could I take that and use that to detect other fraud cases? This one's fascinating to me, by the way. I have several friends who have children, who have a child or a loved one on somewhere on the autism spectrum disorder. They're on that spectrum somewhere. What if we could take scans of MRIs done in 4D, right, 3-dimensional plus time, of patients that have been identified as somewhere on autism spectrum disorder, and compare it to someone that may or may not be on the autism spectrum at all, and do that in real time. Having just gone through an MRI for a scan, that's amazing technology. Within 24 hours, I had a doctor come back to me and go, no, you don't have to worry about your last will and testament codicils yet. Okay, that's a nice feeling. Okay, great. Imagine if we could do that in real time. Now that's, again, a machine learning example that we can use. I have not even played with any of these yet. I think these are great examples, but it's something I definitely want to pursue. Here's some of my plans. I want to take Graph Studio for Autonomous Database and play more with PGX and native mode. I want to play around more with social media data. By the way, did you know that there's no database of Twitter? You have to actually store stuff in your own environment if you want to. I've got a couple links coming up here with some interesting papers on how you might consider doing that. And finally, I want to take a look at misinformation spread, right? Especially as we head into, in the United States at least, another 2-year campaign for our United States Congress and for the Senate for 1/3 of our representatives, and other things happening here in the US. This is a perfect time to look at how misinformation spreads quickly across social media network. So I've got some ideas that I want to explore there. I've got some other links for you. By the way, here's some of the other things I talked about, right? The third one down, by the way, is the one about detecting fake users. Hello? Detecting fake users on a social media with a graph database. That's actually a very formal article. And a couple of other ones there, you know, these are not, I didn't make these up. These are real things, right? Social media sentiment analysis and some other useful references. And otherwise, I am done. and my throat is dry. And I've got a few more minutes here, but I know we have a presentation coming up here in like 7 minutes.
Yeah,
So,
so
or 5 minutes.
we did have a question which actually I didn't read correctly, well, completely.
Okay.
And it was just simply a request saying, are your data sets and things going to be made available as well as your presentation, or just the presentation itself?
Right now, just my presentation. Actually, I'm working on an article series for ODTUG Texceleration, which is our database / application. Oh, thanks for posting those in there too, by the way. Thanks, folks. And the data sets are actually quite small. Okay, they're really just Excel spreadsheets, CSVs, right? I do want to post these out there eventually. We're talking about maybe putting them out in the learning libraries, right? The live SQL libraries, but I have not gotten that far yet. Thanks, Roger.
Okay, thanks, Jim. And Jim, just I know this isn't actually a question in general, but at Kscope, as you're going to be there, and this is a bit of a plug for us as well, during the week of Kscope, which runs from 19th to 23rd of June, on the Tuesday, if you have time, we're going to, our tech cast that week is going to be a panel, and we're just going to grab a whole lot of folk. So far, we have Edelweiss, myself, Wayne, and Tim Vlamis. I think those are the main folk we've got so far.
Right.
I might be missing. And we're just going to all sit on our bench and talk about the things that we've found new and useful and interesting at Kscope for our TechCast audience. So if you are going to be there in person, I'd be very honored if you could join us.
Is this the panel that we're doing during lunchtime?
Yes.
I am your master of ceremonies for that, believe it or not.
Oh no. So this is different. I think this is not for Kscope. It's specifically for ANDOUC. So it's in addition.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm inviting you to another party.
Okay, if I'm not presenting at the same time, I'd be more than happy to. Kscope's kind of be crazy, but
yeah,
it'll be fun. Yeah.
It'll be good to see you.
By the way, if you haven't signed up for Kscope yet, you might want to think about it, because I think rooms are filling up quickly. By the way, last time I checked.
That's true. Yeah. So
not to pitch for it, but
anyway,
go ahead.
More questions from on the actual
Excellent.
thing. So
okay.
I think we're just about done. Let me just
I will stop sharing and give it back to you guys.
Yeah. Jim, thank you so much for presenting. It was, as always, it's a little bit like drinking from the fire hose listening to you. But
I know, sorry.
No, don't apologize. It's fantastic. Really interesting. Thank you so much.
Do you have a minute for me to ask a quick question of Jim, or maybe not? If you don't have time,
Oh yeah, we do. We've got 2 minutes before we have KJ joining us.
So,
Sure.
Jim, it was a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much. As someone who's like you talked a lot about relational databases, and you're very familiar with that very clearly. I wondered what your comments are on, like, why should one use this versus a quote-unquote native database, which is a claim that some folks make is better for these types of things.
Great question. Yeah, I know Neo4j pops up a lot in that respect. Here's my thought. Why do you need to go outside of Oracle to go do something like that if it's already built in and it's free? Yeah, I could go learn a new technology. I could learn a whole new thing. But if my data is already inside my Oracle database, or I can get to my data from inside my Oracle database, right? It might be stored externally, could be stored in, even in an S3 bucket. I don't care where it is. The concept of converged database lets me get to data from wherever, right? I've already got an environment built. I've already got everything all ready to go. I don't need to spin up a Kubernetes cluster. I don't need to spin up a node. I don't need to install anything. It's here. How much more simple could it be? That's my take. Keep it simple. right? So sure, I could go learn Neo4j, I could go learn its language. It's going to look a lot like PGQL or the other things. I'm going to have to learn something new. Why not learn this? That's my take.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jim. Well, like, why move the data? Like, moving the data is non-trivial.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Right. And if you move it, you could break it. So, great question.
Thank you very much, Jim. And with that, I think
You're very
we are right
welcome.
on time to go to our next speaker. Roger, over to
Yeah.
you.